Welcome back to another episode of our movie business podcast series where we look to make sense of the current trends in the film and television industry. My name is Ilan Haimoff, and I'm a partner and the department head of the Profit Participation Group at GHJ. In this podcast, also named as Jason's Crystal Ball for many years now, I'm joined by Jason Squire himself, Professor Emeritus at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, as well as the editor of the Movie Business Book in its fourth edition, to discuss our prediction for 2022, none of which comes with a guarantee. Jason, welcome.
Thanks so much, Ilan. It's great to be back with you.
Same here. And here we are again, another year behind us. And as we look to 2022, Jason, why don't you kick the conversation off?
Yes, thank you. To do this properly, Ilan, we have to remove the velvet cover of the crystal ball, dust it off a little, and see what we have here. Let me take another look. Oh, look at that. Oh, gosh. Okay. So in general, 2022 will continue this era of disruption and transition in entertainment. With only 60 to 70% of theater audiences returning, and streaming still strong, but the growth leveling off, it'll be another challenging year. So let's divide it into categories: management, production, distribution, exhibition, and streaming. Management, we look forward to three major changes kicking in: changes in ownership, subject to government approval, Amazon buying MGM, and remember, not the golden studio age library of MGM, which resides at Warner's through the Turner deal, but only the post-1986 MGM library, plus other libraries, including the valuable United Artists Library. The Warner Brothers Discovery merger will be finalized by the middle of next year, moving AT&T out of the movie business for good reason, in my opinion. And CAA bought ICM Partners, further consolidating the talent agency business.
Yeah, and I think that all of these mergers you're referring to are subject to regulatory approvals. I think likely will be approved, as you say, in the coming year. But I think that we need to keep an eye out for more consolidations and changes by competitors of all those entities that you mentioned, because they may react to these changes by making their own moves, perhaps additional potential consolidations, maybe not at the biggest company and studio level, but perhaps smaller studios that we may see more activity.
Yeah, that's right. So who's your leading candidate to be acquired next year?
I think that, as opposed to my prediction, I think that if you watch the chatter, there is conversations around Lionsgate and perhaps even AMC Networks.
Yes. So there are a couple of other management issues to deal with: the redesign of the release schedule, the backlog of inventory that occurred during the COVID almost 2 years now, should end by middle of 2022, with the theatrical window settling at about 45 days of exclusive theatrical before any streaming owning studio allows the movie to go to streaming. Management will continue to redesign the supply chain, for example, where it's safest to shoot using COVID protocols. And in general, another headline is there are more sound stages under construction around the world. It's really a construction boom in order to feed the insatiable appetite of streamers. Also, now that the Scarlett Johansson settlement has been set, this will lead to a slew of similar suits, it seems to me, from major talent through the next few years. Now, if we assume no more major upheavals from any new variant, and that's always the big question mark in this trying time, global box office should return to 2019 levels, pre-COVID levels, in 2023. That's the hopeful prediction. And something that, Ilan, you know about more than all other players in the business, except for those who are really making the deals, that deal makers will continue to invent new strategies for the back end of talent agreements to make up for the loss of back end when movies are, when that theatrical window is reduced. You hold the keys to these new deals.
Yeah, I would say I would be more of an observer as changes occur to the various deals. But I think you're right. I think that as change occurs in the industry, the deals themselves are going to change, and it's how revenue is shared, how costs are shared between partners, between the producer versus the talent, between studios and streaming services, between streaming services and production companies. A lot of those deals are going to likely change over time. But as you and I have talked about before, our role continues to be the forensic accountants to make sure that those transactions are done in accordance with the agreements. So our role continues to be the same. It's just maybe looking at different transactions.
While being privy to these new definitions, it's really an extremely vital area of the industry that you've been involved in for quite some time. We can turn to production and just mention that COVID protocols will continue as productions protect all personnel. These protocols add some 15 to 20% to the budget. And on the set, protocols for firearms and other dangers will be much more strict in the aftermath of the unintentional killing on the set of Alec Baldwin's Western Rust and all the fallout from that.
Yeah, if I were to add a little more, I think that what we're seeing, and I think that's going to even become more and more evident in 2022, the talent has simply more leverage. There's just not enough talent to to be on set at multiple different productions around the world. There's a need for talent, but at the same time, the talent has more leverage with respect, and I think you've said it, with respect to both health and safety, which is going to be very critical, and benefits. And so the talent is shifting to having more power in the coming year.
What about the question of insurance? COVID insurance, that's been sort of hovering ever since the pandemic began. What is your sense of what to expect in that area?
This is a difficult one. I think that from what we're hearing, right, Jason, that there's a continued struggle to find sufficient insurance. And so the larger studios will continue to self-insure, and the smaller production companies are going to have, as you said already, with increased costs of these higher expensive policies alongside all of these procedures. I've heard from a producer that they actually have to have on set two staff that all they do is make sure that the COVID health and safety procedures are followed. I mean, it is expensive.
Yeah, the idea of fewer people gathering, the use of pods, separating people that otherwise would simply be behind the camera will be bunched together. And of course, streamlining post-production as well. It's a continuing issue that the crystal ball has really still a lot of vague. It's still not it's much better than in the first COVID year. Now we're numbering COVID years, 2020. But your sense is it still hasn't kicked in with a reliable insurance product?
Not yet. No. Yeah, it's still an evolving area.
Yeah. Well, now unions are another issue during production and post, for that matter. The IA has recently settled the new agreement, last about 3 years with management, the AMPTP, and they'll ease into this agreement slowly. But it seems the big story, as we discussed, is that the strength of the Writers Guild of America, WGA, in their victory this year against management, especially those agencies that own production companies. And since the WGA won that concession by the production owning agencies, as a result, those talent agency owned production companies will reduce ownership to some 20%. And WME has already done that with Endeavor Content. And that should continue. This, of course, led to the successful signing of the WGA franchise agreement. Should we turn to distribution?
Yes.
Okay, let's turn to distribution. It's a very sad story, as is exhibition, with millions of dollars lost when theaters closed for much of 2021, opened back to a certain percentage towards the end of the year, but still not full capacity. And again, I think it'll take another year or more for, and this is the optimist in me, this presumes no more serious COVID issues and variants to be reestablish the box office levels that the pre-COVID levels in 2023. Now, distribution also has shifted away from their release experiments in 2021, notably Warner Brothers, releasing day and date all their product. Distributors will be deciding on a picture-by-picture basis among 3 release patterns: theatrical only, streaming only, and day and date theatrical and streaming, which will become more rare and rare, it seems. And the theatrical window will shorten to 45 days on average before a title going to streaming for those streaming-owned distribution companies.
Yeah, and I think that to me, if I were just to go a little deeper into the exhibition, the theatrical side, I think that it's going to be it's going to take us. I think you've already said that earlier in our podcast. It's going to take us some time before we get back to the pre-COVID levels, but I see that we're likely get to 90% of the pre-pandemic box office in 22. And however, the mixture of the titles, again, that are being exhibited in the theaters are likely going to be the tentpole titles more of, and less of the independent films. So we're going to see a shift that's going to be toward the large titles that are with wide release around the world, and less of the independent films, which will probably go with the other path that you've already mentioned, such as streaming.
Yes, and of course, just to mention in distribution, the whole question of China continues to be a big issue, with the government in China choosing which of the 34 overseas movies will be released and when they will be released, keeping their long holiday periods for local language movies only, and still will not allow recent Marvel movies to be released in China. So we can turn to exhibition, which is really a very serious part of our discussion, because exhibition, it seems, will continue to suffer the most, as it has, by losing so many millions of dollars with theater closing for much of 2021, and of course, much of 2020 as well. As mentioned, they started reopening in the middle of this year, 2021, and are now approaching full capacity. But there are many older viewers and moviegoers who used to be a very reliable part of the general pool, who are resisting going to theaters. They're still not going out to theaters. We'll see what happens with the holiday movies. So sadly, many small theaters have not survived the pandemic. And after the streaming habit took hold, customers are of any age are not in a rush back to theaters, except, as you have said, to make sure they see the tentpole movies and those with Oscar buzz, many art house movies that had been scheduled for theaters during this period will continue to pivot to streaming.
Jason, to add to that, I think the one other thing that we have to get used to is we need to realize that it's going to be in the theaters a fairly short time. And if you want to go see the movie, you better get tickets, because within a couple of weeks, or 2 to 3 weeks, in some cases, maybe as long as a month or a month and a half, the movie will simply move on to the next theatrical window, which likely will be in streaming. So this shorter and shorter window makes it really challenging, both for the studios and the theaters, as well as the consumers, to plan for, to market, and obviously to ensure that they make a profit.
Yes, and as we both bear in mind that the decision for a distributor to shift a picture that had been developed as a theatrical release, if that picture is slotted for streaming only, the distributor saves millions of dollars in advertising costs. So that's another function that is sort of out there in management thinking. So let's talk about streaming. It's the big elephant in the room. That streaming will continue to grow according to the crystal ball, but more slowly than earlier in the pandemic. Streamers and customers will continue to benefit from the at-home viewing habits that grew out of the pandemic. This is really historic, and really was an upheaval of the movie business, which I think ultimately will be good both for customers and for talent. And remembering that streamers are always vulnerable to churn, the idea that subscribers can close an account at any time, which is why Netflix especially tends to open a new movie and or series every single week. Netflix itself will be spending almost $20 billion in original content in 2022, with rivals not far behind.
Yeah. So I would say that just to add to what you were referring to, which subscription VOD is an area that is getting more and more crowded. So there's more and more competition. So no matter how much money Netflix throws toward production, there's competition, and that competition is only going to get worse. So I think that we may be reaching a point of plateau, when it comes to number of subscribers, that for a little while, I guess the international market perhaps also becomes less and less an area of growth, similar to where we are now in the United States. Where I see growth, and I'm going to be watching this carefully, is the advertising supported VOD, so the AVOD, or also known as the FVOD. So it's a free VOD where you're subject to some advertising throughout the when you watch something, every so often you may be watching a short skit of commercials. That area is ripe for growth. I think there's going to be some growth there, and I'm watching that carefully as the subscription VOD market perhaps is becoming very crowded, and as you say, you may be seeing quite a bit of shift where consumers may be looking at shifting between one subscription service to another based on what show they want to watch for a period of time. So there's going to be some change between subscription services, but perhaps that whole market might be reaching some level of reduced growth.
Very good. So just another detail about streaming, which I'm getting from the crystal ball, having to do with a decision for a distributor on a picture developed for theatrical with major talent involved, deciding to pivot to streaming, which would very well happen in the future, even without the pandemic. Because of the pandemic lessons on the talent agent and lawyer side, can we assume that there are now embedded in talent agreements new clauses that say, gee, if you guys, we're intending this to be theatrical, I guess this is in response to the Scarlett Johansson. However, if you shift to streaming, talent will get this big extra bucket of money. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be adjustments to agreements to provide for studios more flexibility of where they distribute the product and how the talent is compensated. However, making changes like you were suggesting could take more than a year. I think this is likely going to happen, but I think it might take some more time for it to occur.
In the studio ecosystem, this is likely to happen when the money sees the rough cut, because only then do they have a sense that the promise of expected theatrical gross on a given movie would be realized based on their instincts. And if that's not the case, then I imagine there'd be these flurry of meetings and persuasive acts in order to shift to streaming and also save those marketing costs. So a couple of other beats on streaming, that streamers do not share their data, leaving talent and their representatives and also viewers in the dark. Unlike the reported theatrical gross and Nielsen television ratings. So it's hard to value a hit or a miss. This, of course, is deliberate on the part of streamers, this lack of transparency. But it seems that the crystal ball is indicating that with more success, the industry players will demand a basic form of charting success. For example, last month in November, Netflix announced a weekly chart of hours watched per movie. So that's a start if the other streamers follow. They also released a chart of the 10 most watched films, one chart for English language and one for non-English language, which seems to be a really important step forward in this arena of trying to determine value and comparisons. And finally, a beat about Netflix, that for years they would buy everything, especially completed independent films. Today, they seem to be almost exclusively showing homegrown original content, something new every weekend, including movies, and especially episodic series. And a final note about streaming, and this is, I think, embedded in the shift for some major demographic groups to stay home from theaters, which is very sad, but to add to the revenue of streamers, the simple idea that you can't fast forward in a movie theater.
Yeah, just to go back to something you said, I may not have the same opinion with respect to the transparency of viewership. I think on the streaming platforms, it may take more time to get that transparency. I hope, and this is important because it does provide for the talent and the talent's representatives and production companies, for that matter, to have more visibility to how successful their program was, whether it's a film or a television program. I think we're on the right track, Jason, but I don't know. I think it might take more than 2022 to get there. But you're right. It is on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Now I have one parting shot, kind of in general prediction, if I may. Oh, there it is. It's coming to clear focus in the crystal ball. And that has to do with the move to more self-driving cars. And the idea that the push to self-driving cars, which will grow and grow and grow around the world, in self-driving cars, windows can act as screens. So that's a totally new way of distributing content.
Jason, I don't know if I've shared this with you previously, but I had the pleasure of actually being in one of those cars, at least a demo of one, where you're sitting in the back seat and there's an avatar that's providing you with information about traffic, perhaps checking your emails, perhaps getting on a phone call, giving you the calendar of the day, and then maybe listening to some music, and then maybe watching some catching up on your film
Yeah.
of choice, or perhaps catching up on the episode you missed last week while you're driving, wherever you're headed. The car will take care of that. You're going to be enjoying that ride. It was fun. It was fun to experience.
Wow, what a great experience. Well, this is it. I mean, that's so glad you had that experience, because this makes you a futurist, as you've been
right.
for so many years.
That's right. I think that we have shared with the audience quite a bit of predictions, and we'll see if they come true. Again, no guarantees. We don't know exactly what will happen. There may be perhaps a surprise that we haven't anticipated or expected, but at least we wanted to share with everyone at least our thoughts and our predictions. And it's been a joy to do that with you, Jason.
Thank you. Me too, Ilan. This is always fun.
Well, thank you.